Hello and good evening. Welcome to the West Hartford Board of Education regular meeting. We are calling it to order. It is now Wednesday, February the 22nd, 2023. Charlotte, may you please begin with the roll call?
Dr. Chang.
Present.
Mr. Goldman.
Here.
Dr. Harris.
Here.
Dr. Kamoff.
Here.
Ms. Nazarella.
Present.
Dr. Steinberg.
Here.
Dr. Thomas Farquharson.
Here.
Student Representative Megan Murphy.
Here.
And Student Representative Caitlin Striffcave.
Excused. Thank you. And Megan, may you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We do not have a revision to the agenda order, and we now have public communications. This is an opportunity where we're able to hear from you, your thoughts, your questions, your concerns, your suggestions. Each person has 3 minutes to speak, and while speaking, please be mindful of Charlotte, who will hold up a yellow card when you have 1 minute remaining in your time, and a red card when your time has expired. Please know that while you are speaking, we are attentively listening to comments being made. However, it is board policy that we do not respond to comments as they are being made or during the meeting. When you come to the podium, if you can please share your name and your town of residence. We do have a policy where we start first by hearing from those speaking on agenda items, and those agenda items for this evening include proposed school calendar for 2024-2025, multi-year enrollment projections, and superintendent search update. And so we have a list here. There is no one who has signed up for agenda items. However, I will ask, is there anyone here who would like to speak on an agenda item? Hearing none, we now will move to those who have signed up to speak on general comments. And first on the list, we have Anita.
My name is Anita, and I live in West Hartford. I just want to state that today there was a Freedom of Information Commission meeting, and at that meeting, if you will recall, February 15th, I gave a Freedom of Information request for records which were financial detail, and I had written out what they were. Elizabeth Hewitt has not provided all the records, and they found her in violation for that Freedom of Information. And I'm going to say why that is important for you. In my youth, I did serve as treasurer down in Philadelphia, mainline Philadelphia to be exact. And I was fresh out of college. I did all of my introductory business courses at the Wharton School of Business. So, you know, I went in with a big nose up, and I was asked to do treasurership. Interesting things occurred at that time in Philadelphia. There was ABSCAM, and RICO laws were very much looked at. Well, I was involved with the local civic association. Most of the members were attorneys. These were attorneys, Philadelphia located between New York and Washington, D.C. They belonged to larger firms and had licenses in all 3 states. Anyway, I remember one of them, and this is important for all of you to understand when receipts are not being provided. One of the attorneys came to me, and he said, I vote on things. I need to know what's going on. If you have questions, come to me. I have junior partners. This was a Skadden Arps attorney. And what he said to me most importantly, which I thought was odd at the time, but I understand now, if I vote incorrectly, my license will be at stake, and so will be my reputation. My license and my reputation, because it had to do with finances. And I can guarantee you that before he ever made that statement, he was always watching me. I could tell that. And every once in a while, he'd ask for the receipts. Well, it was always there, and I kept it in the room where we met. Take it for what you will, but Elizabeth Hewitt hasn't produced she hasn't produced all of the records that show exactly how the money is being spent. And you have students in classes who are not getting textbooks. One of the mothers recently came and said in Conard in Science, midterm C's and D's because the students don't have textbooks. That is one of the receipts that I was asking for. Middle school, 3 grades, science class, 2 textbooks per table. From my understanding is the textbooks are not allowed to leave the table. How are they studying science? Please keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Addie.
Addie Lorden, 561 Park Road. According to your own records from your finance director, over $400,000 has been spent on textbooks. Yet there is no list of titles and which grades they go to. Over $100,000 has been spent on workbooks. Yet, as parent in this district for 15 years, I haven't seen a workbook come home or in the school for over a decade. It's all handouts that are photocopied. Over 29,000 per student per year spent, more than Greenwich at 20,000, and our children come home with photocopies. What else is being done in your name? Well, let me tell you. When interim Superintendent Morrow was assistant superintendent in charge of administration, he allowed targeting of students, removal from class to tell them that they were mean, and told a student to go to the psychologist. What else is being done in your name? You, the Board of Education. Your town attorney Dodge and Corporation Council is before the FOIA Commission for denying rights to a resident, me, under the Freedom of Information Act. He has now hired Cowdrey, Murphy, Dennehy, and Healy to defend him for denying my rights. This is a white-collar defense firm, hired because, under your name, Town Attorney Dodge denied my rights. Also denied my right to sit down with HR Director Julio Duarte to discuss hiring practices. We parents, we residents are allowed under law to know who is hired and who is spending time 6 hours a day, 5 days a week in the presence of our children. Without accessibility, there is no accountability. If parents cannot access information, they cannot hold anyone accountable. What is being done in your name? There are 3 bills now entered into the legislation, one of which says that you cannot, under FOIA as a parent, it's proposed, seek the records for the conversations between teachers and your students. People are worried you're eroding the parental rights. You're not eroding the parental rights. You're eroding the student rights. Because without parents and guardians advocating for their children, asking questions, demanding records, demanding accountability through accessibility for information, then our children have no rights. And as Anne McKernan said, they're under our control. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment, a general comment? All right, we will now pause on public communications. And before we go to non-staff communication and reports, just want to take a point of privilege just to acknowledge that we are approaching the end of February, and we know that we often, February is recognized as Black History Month. However, we know that Black history is American history, and that can be celebrated year-round. And so with that, I just want to share a quote with you that was stated by Booker T. Washington, who was known as an educator, an author, an orator, and an advisor to several presidents. And he once said, "Success is to be measured not so much by the position that one has reached in life as by the obstacles which he has overcome while trying to succeed." And as we know, American history, Black history is timeless. This quote is timeless. So certainly want to share that with you as we continue to uplift all of those that have contributed to making this country as great as it is. And so with that, now I would like to move to non-staff communications and reports, and we'll hear from Megan, who will share updates. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. So tonight I just have a few quick announcements, a lot of them regarding our girls' sports at Connor. They had a big weekend this weekend, starting with girls' track and field. They had state opens, and I want to recognize 3 of our athletes. First, Audrey Kirkudis. She was the champion in high jump. Liv Sherry, she was the champion in 1,000 meter. And Tess Sherry, who was the state runner-up in 1,600 meter. So that was amazing accomplishments by all 3 of them and the entire team. And then secondly, Conard girls basketball had a big weekend, winning 3 games in the CCC tournament. And last night they defeated the number 2 seed, E.O. Smith. So that was amazing. And they'll play tomorrow at University of Hartford at 7 p.m. for the championship game, which is a really big deal. So we're really proud of them. And then just outside of athletics, the English department held their 2nd annual Shakespeare competition. And then secondly, Conard Young Democrats Club and Environmental Club members met with State Representative Kate Farrar and State Senator Derek Slapp to learn about public hearings and how to testify and make their voice heard, which was really important and a great opportunity for them. So that's all I have.
That's a lot that you have. Thank you so much. And for our student representative, Caitlin, she's not here for good reason. She's part of Pops and Jazz, and they are actively preparing this week. So we wish her well as all of the other students. Now moving on to new business, where we have the proposed calendar for the 2024-2025 school year, the first reading, that is. And we have a recommendation that the Board of Education review as a first reading the proposed calendar for the 2024-2025 school year. And so before we move ahead, we'll pass it to Dr. Morrow.
There you go. So as you know, that we go ahead and the board adopts and considers calendars 2 years ahead of time for planning purposes for parents, to arrange everything from holidays, vacations, to daycare and such. And so in doing so, we consider various start days, we consider the mandates that are provided by the state, and we also consider the focus of trying to be out of school at a reasonable date, as we know that it gets warm come June, and we know that people have plans for that. And so what you have in front of you is your first read of the school calendar for 2024-2025. It begins on August 28th as the first day. If you remember, traditionally we start the first day on Wednesdays. That gives us the half day. It's a great transition for students, and gives that opportunity that we feel is important for them to start on such a positive note. It also then ends on June 11th. And as usual, any snow days, any other issues, we would add on to the end of that. The only addition that is on here that you haven't seen before is, as requested, we included the addition of the holiday on November 1st of Diwali. And so, open to any questions you might have or any suggestions that you'd like to consider before your second reading.
Right. So teammates, questions. Before we do that, let's formalize this with a motion, and then we'll have our second, and then we'll formally have discussion. So is there a motion that the Board of Education review as a first reading the proposed calendar for the 2024-2025 school year?
So moved.
Thank you, Ari. Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you, Jason. Discussion. So teammates, what are your thoughts with what's been shared?
Mine was a question, is Diwali, how many, is there a rule how you do it, or is it just percent? I don't have a problem with it, but I just want to understand the rules.
It's a great question, Ethan. No, there isn't a rule. Let me qualify that and say that each year in our curriculum office and our equity advancement office, we provide guidance and resources to our teachers to understand the various religions, cultural practices, traditions, and to be responsive of a variety of different holidays that aren't formally recognized on our current holiday, Diwali being on our current calendar, Diwali being one of them. There is no board policy, nor is there a district rubric for at a certain threshold of students or families, this holiday gets added, that holiday gets added. We include information and have always been responsive to Jewish holidays, to Eid at the end of Ramadan, to Diwali, to Three Kings Day, and other holidays where school may be in session. This was an ad to formally recognize this holiday. We don't track at a district level the number of students by religion or by celebration. We can estimate and give a rough estimate based on the home languages that are perhaps spoken. And again, it's a rough generalization of probably also combining that with the 3 or 4% that we estimate would be our Indian Peninsula students of that nationality. And we can argue probably close to 350 students perhaps and their families that would be celebrating this. Okay. But again, that's just there's no rubric, there's no tracking of it.
Because my assumption is once it's on, it's on.
That's completely up to you as the board.
All right. Thanks.
If I may say, Ethan, I appreciate the question. Thank you. And thank you very much, Dr. Murrow, for the thorough answer to that. And with this addition, and certainly the question of as to why, it certainly does reflect our acknowledgement of the students who we serve in our community and in our town as well. And so receptiveness to adding this to our calendar is one that will be well received by many if it does officially move to a vote. And so thank you for your question of wanting to learn more.
So I think we might want to look, and I'm not sure when, to set the rules so it's at least set. Maybe it's something, I don't know, it shouldn't be ambiguous, I guess. So it's something to think, I wasn't looking to do it now, but it may be something for the future.
Right. I think when you say set the rules, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
So what is the perception, because it is perception, of how many students or families observe it? Because there may be other ones out there. I'm going to display my ignorance of what other might be there, but, you know. And that's not to say they shouldn't, because my kids certainly benefited from religious holidays. Although the town I grew up, they didn't have any, and I loved it. But my kids were different. They wanted to make sure the holidays were there. So I'm good with it. I just think we ought to have rules. And I don't know what they are.
I know one, it's policies. And we know with our policies, and that is one of the pieces that as a board member, we collectively are responsible for. And one of our recently passed policies in terms of educational equity. And so that in and of itself governs and acknowledges wanting to respond to supporting this edition. But I certainly hear what you're saying, because it's important to be aware of why one is voting in support of something in a particular way. And so I appreciate the question.
I just think there should be a threshold that it should hit, and I don't know what that number should be. I'm willing to accept the 3 to 4% that Dr. Morrow suggested, so, or projected.
Again,
No, I got it.
rough estimate.
No, that's fair.
To be clear.
Yes, Claire.
So I think the policy first would have to be to collect religious information from families, because you wouldn't have those numbers. He's making an estimate based on some of the country of origin, the families. So if you wanted a hard number, you'd have to start collecting religious affiliation.
I'm good with estimates. Because I don't think it would be fair to go ask families for that information. I wouldn't want to ask the question, so I wouldn't want to put the school system in asking that question. I just think there should be a rule, or there should be some kind of, not a rule, but policy or some kind of, I don't know, it's something to think about. It just may be something we should think about, so, because I don't have what the rule should be. 3 to 4% seem to me make sense. So.
Gail.
So, Andy, I just wanted to clarify, you said something about like Ramadan and Three Kings Day, but we're not giving those days off from school currently, is that correct?
Correct.
Right. So again, I'm curious, like, why we then decide to give this day off when we're not giving Ramadan or we're not giving Three Kings Day. And I'm sure there's, I know there's like, again, I'm not an expert on this, but, certain Asian cultures like Vietnamese have like a different New Year's, I think. So, I mean, I think to sort of further maybe what Ethan's saying, or I think he's saying, is that how are we deciding that we give this off, but we're not giving, the end of Ramadan off, which is a big holiday for Muslims? And I don't know, I'm asking how that decision is made, because my concern is that we could, continue to constantly give days off for all kinds of holidays, and how are we deciding which ones we are and which ones we aren't?
I'm going to defer that to the board chair, and that the board sets the calendar and the requirements for that.
And I appreciate the question, Gail, and it's important what all has been said, because we need to be intentional with what we vote on and what we support, and it's important that our calendar is congruent with what we as a district support and uplift. So with the other questions you were asking of other religious holidays, I'll just bring it back to the one that's on the table at this time in terms of Diwali. And again, we know that we do not account for, we do not take note of the religious backgrounds of students. That is, we don't account for that. We don't have data points for what religious backgrounds. We do for languages. And we know we certainly speak of how proud we are of our district representing over 70 languages spoken in the district. With respect to Diwali, from what I believe, of those persons who may practice Diwali, and of the languages, rather, again, the languages, we have data points of that, even bringing it outside of the school district, from our town, that is. We know that Nepali, or those that are Nepalese, we have a high percentage of those that speak Nepali in West Hartford. I can't give a specific, but I do believe it's one of the highest in Connecticut. It's a quite high percentage. So even if we think outside of those students within our school buildings, and we think of those that represent our community at large, we have a large percentage of individuals who would, that this would favor, this would be in support of. And so I say that not I say that as a way of respecting the questions being asked, because again, we want to be intentional with what we are doing and supporting, but it certainly is within an intentional and purposeful reason to add this to the calendar, because it is one that would support many young people in their beliefs in favor. And with the other questions you asked, we'll have to one piece at a time. So this is the piece that's on the calendar that's being proposed at this time. Yes, Ari.
I just want to comment that Yom Kippur is not listed as one of the important dates. It's marked as a holiday, but it's not in the center.
I checked, it was a weekend, Friday night.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I looked.
No, I appreciate it. I was getting myself confused, so.
The dates are always confusing.
Gail.
I want to bring one other thing up. So I know that, like, for example, in some of the Jewish schools in town on Martin Luther King Day, the kids actually do go to school, but they actually have the whole day is dedicated to learning about Martin Luther King and, you know, his legacy and the things that he accomplished. So I want to raise here, and is that something that potentially would be of interest, in that we mark Diwali and possibly other holidays in school with some type of educational program that would celebrate Diwali, so that kids actually are learning something about it, as opposed to just having a day off where the majority of our students will probably go to the mall. So, I mean, when when my kids went to the Jewish school, I felt like they came away knowing a lot about Martin Luther King, a lot about his legacy, and a lot about the things that he did, which I found to be, very beneficial. But anyways, that's just something I'm questioning, whether we would actually honor the holiday and the culture more by having kids in school learning about it.
Again, I defer to the board and to the vice chairperson. My understanding was that this wasn't designed on the calendar to honor the culture, but to actually give those students who celebrate an opportunity to be with their families.
Ari.
I mean, I guess I just, along those lines, I mean, if we're going to start picking apart the calendar, I mean, I know for myself, I would be offended if somebody asked that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that I be asked to send my kids to school to learn about those holidays, because I want the other kids to learn about those holidays, because it's a religious holiday and we'll probably be in temple. And having my kids not have to miss school and worry about academics, I think is like one of the things that I value about living in a town that recognizes Jewish holidays. So I feel like it's slightly offensive if we're talking about adding this to the school calendar and then turning it around and saying, but we'll go to school so other people can learn about your holiday, but you should come to school. It feels offensive to me. I just wonder how you would feel if, that was being asked of Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur.
So I just want to respond to that. So I actually would have no problem if Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur were not on the calendar. I think that those are, personal holidays that if I want to celebrate them and I want my kids to celebrate them, then we make our own decision how we celebrate it. I don't find it at all offensive if a school doesn't have school. a school does have school on those days. No offense to Diwali and no offense to any holidays here. I'm just wondering how we go about making these decisions. I mean, the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur thing has been in place for many, many years. I mean, when I was a student, and that's going back a long time, we got off Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, so that's sort of been there. But, I think when we now are going to consider other holidays, then I think, having some type of metric or way to do that, I think makes sense, because there's a lot of different holidays that we could be putting onto the calendar.
I guess for me, there's no school district that has kids come in on Christmas, right? We all know that. So to be in a town that values Judaism and recognizing those families and not have to have kids worry about missing class because of their religion, that's part of the reason that I really value this town. There aren't a lot of towns, to be very honest, if you go through Connecticut, that give the Jewish holidays off. And that's what I think sets West Hartford apart from a lot of other towns. They recognize differences, and they are inclusive, and they look at kind of how can we best represent all of the families in this town. And I think adding Diwali to the calendar is just another example of how, West Hartford values diversity and inclusion. And I think to deny that to some extent, I think it's what makes us special and sets us apart.
Renee.
I just want to add, just because the day is observed, doesn't mean that there couldn't be a curricular focus around learning about Diwali, learning about Martin Luther King Jr. Those curricular aspects are part of, not in the purview of the board, but I think, we can lend our support to, this isn't just a day off, this is a support for this culture, and showing our recognition of that culture within the town.
And if I may, Renee, thank you for sharing that. And I do believe that the Office of Curriculum and Equity Advancement does prioritize that. It does ensure that the educators are aware of various cultures and the diversity of cultures and religious practices and languages. So again, we're intentional with what we're teaching our students. So that is taking place and certainly would continue in any shape, form, or fashion. And one other thing I also just want to comment on, again, I appreciate the robust discussion of this because, again, we want to be intentional with how we decide. Although there may have been certain holidays that have been recognized for decades, in a long period of time, and that's how it may have been, and there are new ones that are being considered, many of those new ones that are being considered have also been aware and acknowledged for decades. They're just now getting the recognition and the validation that's long overdue. And that's the beautiful thing with our district here, that we are one of wanting to recognize and account for all of those who make up our district. And that's part of the definition of equity and equality and diversity and inclusion. So this is one way of demonstrating that, of trying to account for those who make our community as wonderful as it is, even if that level of recognition hasn't always been there. But again, appreciate this conversation very much so. Did you have a comment? Or? Mm-hmm. Yes, Jason, and then Ethan.
No, it's okay. I can go after you.
Okay. All right. Yes, thank you. I think this is an important conversation because in many ways, the calendar serves many functions for us, and it operates also under certain constraints. I think while we're evaluating how we spend our time, whether that's instructional time in school or community building or observing religious holidays, those are all parts of, all a part of everyday life. And I think it's worth pointing out that Asian Americans and Caribbeans are the fastest growing immigrant groups to our state, to Connecticut. So of those Asian Americans, those from South Asia are the largest subgroup within the state. So this is, in some ways we're looking at an accurate representation of Connecticut's population. And thinking about how do we serve everyone well, and these are this particular, holiday, I would say would be different than say like Lunar New Year, right? Like you were referencing. There's, Lunar New Year can take place over like 2 weeks, right? So we're not going to have 2 weeks off in that period to observe that, but yet it's a holiday that's observed by billions of people on the planet. So there's, certainly, would love a day to devoted to that in my family. But at the same time, recognizing that in the flow of things, that's not everyone's experience, right? That, like you were saying with the Jewish holidays, that you wouldn't mind having them be in school days. But I think for this particular holiday, for the inclusion of Diwali, I think it's not just one kind of celebration, that there are there are ethnic differences in how that holiday is celebrated. And I think recognizing that ethnic diversity within the religion and the population representation in the state is as has been said already, shows that West Hartford is looking forward to the future and how the calendar can serve lots of people. So I think, in terms of how we continue to think about holidays, and I think this is how we do it. We have discussions about it, and we feel we sense where the community is. We've received a letter from a student saying that asking us to consider Diwali as a school holiday. So we listen, we discuss. Not every holiday is gonna fall on a school day. So I think this is how we do that work. We do it through discussion.
So this is just real quick. As I said, I grew up in a town that did not celebrate Jewish holidays, particularly since I was the only kid in my grade who was Jewish. And I loved skipping school to go to services. But I still remember the soccer game I missed in high school. So I think it's better to align the kids with the holidays if they're going to observe them. And I'm assuming, and I know for our kids, they would have been missing school whether the holidays they're recognized by the school system or not. So just for us, but I can't speak for others.
Ari.
I guess the thing that keeps coming back to me, and very similar experience, Ethan, of like growing, the town that I grew up actually now recognizes Jewish holidays, but did not when I was growing up, and I would have to miss school or miss, events. But I think what this really comes down to, and it's kind of along the same lines as what Jason was saying, is that it's about having our students feel validated, having them be seen, having them feel valued as their authentic self, and having a holiday on our school calendar that values their religious beliefs is just another way to do that. I think kids don't feel seen a lot of times. I remember feeling, just like I said, like everybody had Christmas off. We're never going to not have Christmas. We're not going to have an in-service on Christmas to talk about Christianity. So I just feel like this is the right thing to do, given our demographics in our town, and valuing, again, diversity and inclusion, and letting our students feel valued and feel like they are being seen.
Other comments, questions? Gail, yes.
My concern with this, and I'm not necessarily opposed to it, I just feel that we need some type of metric, because I feel that, what happens next is that we also need to be looking at all the other holidays that people want to have off, and at some point, that starts to impact, how many days kids are in school. So, it's lovely to have holidays off, but I what happens when people want to have the end of Ramadan off and they want to have other holidays off. So I feel like going forward, we need some type of way to make these decisions, whether it's based on, percentages of kids in school celebrating or other metrics. But, I'm happy that students are writing in, but I don't know if that's the only variable when making this kind of a decision. I think we need more hard data.
If I might.
Yes.
Gail, I think that's a good point, and I would agree. I think that it's probably appropriate, since the equity policy came out of the policy committee, that this be something that you may want to direct the policy committee to take a look at and to decide, is there an approach that is used at other districts, or is there an approach that you guys can develop from a policy standpoint that makes sense for that?
Claire.
So I'm kind of confused in that there had been discussion there about this, I understand, and it's part of the diversity and inclusion. And when we don't have to worry about a strange holiday being added to the calendar haphazardly, because we are proposed it 2 years out, we discuss, and we make a decision. So what more of a rule would we need other than to discuss and approve as a board?
So I'm not 100% sure what you're asking, but I think that the concern is that, 4% of kids in West Hartford, that's still a very small amount of kids. So what happens, next year when we get a letter from a Muslim student who wants us to give them off the last day of Ramadan, which is a big feast? And then what happens the next year when somebody wants another holiday off? I'm not making a decision. I'm just saying that I think that there needs to be a metric. When you look at 4% of students, that's not that many students. It doesn't sound to me like that many students. So I'm just suggesting that we have a way of looking at this going forward, because when we give off this holiday, I'm sure there's going to be people writing us letters saying, you gave off this holiday, you gave off Rosh Hashanah, let's give off Ramadan, let's give off Three Kings Day, let's give off one day of Lunar New Year. So, at some point I think then kids aren't really in school very much. So I'm suggesting that there's some way to look at this in a more scientific way than just, somebody wrote a letter.
Jason.
4% of 9,000 is 360.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that, again, appreciate all of the comments and questions and thoughts and concerns that are being raised. And again, with wanting to be intentional, and this is a first reading, so we're not voting today. We'll have it to come before us again. And in doing so, just encourage that as we are intentional with our steps, that we certainly don't want to prioritize numbers over people and cultures and human beings. And so I encourage for that to be a part of our thought process as well. Any other? Yes.
I do have a proposed edit for Indigenous Peoples Day. Typically, that day is represented, the peoples is a plural possessive, so I would recommend making that change to be more in line with how it's typically represented.
Thank you, Renee. Any other thoughts or comments regarding the proposed calendar for 2024-2025? Yes.
Could, as a non-member of the policy committee, could the policy committee at least consider it? Just a request.
Rephrase, please. What are you phrasing?
I think it was Dr. Morrow, somebody suggested that it go to the policy committee to look at to see, is there a policy worth setting, or is there some way to research what other towns do or what other rules they have? So we formalize, again, it's not going to be rigid, black and white. It'll have to be a lot of judgment used, but I do think we should have some kind of process or where it hits a certain threshold, this is when we do it, versus it's just ambiguous.
So points well received. What I may suggest is if the intention is for that to take place prior to a vote on the calendar, that likely won't. Okay, thank you. All right. So points well received, duly noted. Thank you. Other comments, questions regarding the first reading of the 2024-2025 calendar? All right.
Just in case anyone is interested, Diwali falls on a Sunday next year, so it's not a factor in the 2023 calendar.
Yes. Thank
The
you.
precedent will be set.
Just wanted to get that out there because I knew someone was going to ask that question once we got done with this meeting.
Claire.
Just like we don't want to prioritize numbers over people and cultures, I also don't think surveying every town around us and counting how many states and all that, that's not how we should make our decisions. So if there is a trend of Diwali off in some places, but there's also other places that it's not. So having a criteria of based on how many communities in our vicinity have it off, I don't want that as a part of the decision-making.
So I wasn't looking for Diwali, I was just looking when they set religious holidays or they set national or ethnic holidays, is there a general rule that's used? I wasn't looking for anybody in particular, just an overall, do they have a process or a threshold that they set just in general, no matter what the...
But again, your threshold's very difficult to determine unless you want religious information from families.
I accept that.
All right, other comments? Okay, we will pause and we will have the second reading at a later time. Thank you. No, we do not vote today. The next time when it comes before us is the second reading. At that point in time, we vote. All right. Thank you. And now we shall continue on and move to staff communications and reports. And now we'll receive our superintendent's report.
I wasn't going to add, but you would make a fifth grader that I'm very fond of up at Aiken, Himani, very happy if you added Diwali, because the last time we were talking, she was telling me and her principal all about what they do as a family and going out and doing the fireworks late at night, but doing it in a way and then having to take pictures of the yard ahead of time because they're renting and they don't want to upset. It's very sweet. But anyway, it's certainly a holiday that means a lot to her. So, an update since we've talked last. Schools are engaged in celebration of Black History Month in support of recognizing the contribution of Black Americans in all aspects of history and culture. District and school websites have all of the resources as well for families. Woolkit students, Michaela Broge, Mariah Perry, Kamran Bachelder, and Bugby students, Mika Burke and Brielle Worrell, were honored at the recent Connecticut Association of Schools Elementary Arts Recognition Banquet, recognizing demonstrated excellence and ability in specific art areas, vocal, visual, and instrument, combined with demonstrated character. And their principals were joining them at that evening as well. Conard's manufacturing and woodworking classes have been working to design and build sensory tables for Charter Oak's pre-K and kindergarten classrooms. For those who don't know, sensory tables are flexible tables that can be used for water, for sand, for rice. We always had rice in my son's. And they're just a great thing to have in classrooms. They're also very expensive. And so we reached out to combine these two groups, and the Conard's manufacturing and woodworking classes have developed prototypes that Charter Oak currently is playing with, and both groups are very excited. The initial plans between the two groups are to get the kindergartners and some of the pre-Kers perhaps over on a field trip to the manufacturing sites to get a sense of what they're doing over there for them as well. Pupil Services Department held the SEPTO Transition Night to support families and students transitioning across all levels, pre-K to post-secondary. I had a very positive turnout, with this being the first year we're back in person since 2020. For those who may not know or be a part of this, this is something that every year is just a fantastic opportunity to really help alleviate anxiety amongst parents and fears of transitioning to that next level of school, going from 5th grade to 6th grade, going from 8th grade into high school, and what programs will look like and what student supports will look like. And so it's something that we involve principals in and certainly our Pupil Services Department. Our One Community February focus is on positive school climate and restorative practices, and the Office of Equity Advancement is pleased to kick off this 3-part interactive series with a dynamic guest speaker, Dr. Rydell Harrison. And some may be familiar with Dr. Harrison's work, as he is a West Hartford partner and engaged parent and engaged member of the West Hartford community. And this will be Monday, February 27th, beginning at 5:30 at Hall High School. You can RSVP on the district website or contact Hall if there's further questions. Actually, our extended leadership team received last week intensive initial training in restorative practice, and our middle school leadership has been engaged in more extensive professional learning in the same area. Megan mentioned the Shakespeare competition. I had the privilege of being a guest judge for both Hall and Conard Shakespeare's competition in the previous couple of weeks, and that was interesting and a lot of fun to be a part of that. Senator Blumenthal is planning to visit Conard High School in the coming weeks as part of a roundtable discussion where he wants to share what he's doing at the federal level in terms of dating violence and protecting young people online. And last but certainly not least, we shared guidance today with all of the families from the state of Connecticut regarding free meals for students. Hopefully, as you saw in the emails that we sent, in the email that I forwarded to you, breakfast and lunch will be available to all students at no cost again, starting on March 1st. We'll continue for the remainder of the 2022-23 school year. All of the details and forms are available on the district website, as well as all of the schools' individual websites and newsletters, and at the schools if parents have any questions. And with that, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to entertain them, but that is the update.
Excuse me. Thank you so very much for the update, and just want to echo what you shared in terms of the lunches, starting March the 1st, no longer having to be something that our students have to pay for. And just want to thank our delegation, Senator Slapp, Representative Farrar, Gilchrist, and Exum. Thank you so much for your advocacy in supporting the outcome of this, and we certainly hope to see more. So thank you so much. Thank you. Teammates, any questions regarding the update we've received from our superintendent? All right, seeing none, thank you so much. We'll continue on now to staff reports and board discussions, where we will receive our multi-year enrollment projections. And we will have our wonderful Miss Elizabeth Hewitt to come to the table to share with us.
So as Liz is setting this up, we'll give a sort of a little bit of background for those that are new to this report. In the past, this has always been a report that we've kind of based looking at birth rates, cohort survival rates, a lot of statistical analysis, and with, certainly in the ballpark as far as results, but not always providing the best level of detail that we've wanted to be able to do it. And so we've been able to, as you saw in the write-up, bring in a new process for this, which is dealing with a Power School module, which is dealing with an enrollment analytic piece that they just brought online, that we're one of the first groups to use, and we're really able to interface with the town's planning board, dealing with real estate trends, dealing with different sites and different projects that are coming online. As you know, we have a number of projects in West Hartford that are currently being built out. And so these are the things that we think are going to provide a better projection and a better picture of where we're at long term and short term going forward. Liz, I'm running out of things to talk about, so I'm just kind of riffing here. So if there's any other stuff.
Yeah, so I will just start off with an introduction. I will start off with an introduction as we are getting our technology set up, and thank you, Daniel, for helping me with that. So good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about our multi-year enrollment projections. Andy had mentioned that our report is in the board book. It is on page 3 if you are interested in looking at that as we talk. As you know, student enrollment is really a key factor in determining classroom sections, our class size, our staffing levels, our facility needs, and also our resource funding. So we estimate student enrollment for the upcoming year for budgeting purposes, and as you know, we are going to be discussing the budget at our next board meeting, and we will be reviewing the current year, or rather the upcoming year's enrollment projection at that time.
You're on extended view if you duplicate.
How do I do that? Thank you. But the other thing that we do, hey, there we go. The other thing that we do is we look at multi-year enrollment projections, and we do this for long-term planning. Really, once you get to 5 or 10 years out, we're really looking at trends. We're not looking at exact numbers, but that information and the long-term information that it gives us, hey, thank you, I appreciate it. The information that it gives us is very important. So as we look historically at our enrollment, you can see we've really had a great change in our student enrollment over the past 35 years. So you'll see the first part of this graph is 35 years of actual data. Starting in 88, 89, we had approximately 7,300 students. And as I quote these figures, these are in-district students K to 12. We do that because, we've had different trends over the years. We have started pre-K, we have had more outplacements, et cetera. So we're trying to look at baseline data that's consistent year to year to really look at a trend. So in the 88-89 school year, we had 7,300 students. You can see that it grew quite quickly, actually. And by the time we get to school year 2010-11, we are over 10,000 students. Now, as you may recall, this was a time where we were really focused on facility and space needs to accommodate that growth. It became a key factor in our capital improvement plan every year. We opened Bristow during that time. We rebuilt Charter Oak. We really did a lot of different things to accommodate that growth. Since that peak, we've experienced a decline, a pretty gradual decline, so that in the current year, we have 8,815 in-district K-12 students. And our projections indicate that we'll see a continued gradual decline. The part that you see that's shaded is our estimate at this point of time as to total enrollment for the district. Now, as Andy had mentioned, historically we've done the enrollment projections internally. We've focused on birth rates and we've talked about cohort survival ratios. And that method did serve us well. That was the best information we had at the time, and that's what we used, and it worked well for us. However, it has some limitations. When you're focusing primarily on birth rate, you are, just by the nature of the methodology, 5 years behind in your data. And a lot happens in that 5 years. We certainly see that our population is mobile, they're leaving, and as families move in and out of West Hartford, some of the information that we were seeing for students born 5 years ago as they entered kindergarten just was not accurate. So for the current year, we're leveraging our student information system, which is called PowerSchool, and we're using a new module that they offer. It's called Predictive Enrollment Analytics. And rather than focusing on birth data, Predictive Enrollment Analytics focuses on 3 different areas. It looks at kindergarten enrollment trends over time, it looks at our grade level cohorts, and then it in particular looks at the impact of new residential development, which is really something new for us and something pretty interesting that we're excited about. Or maybe I'm the only one who's excited about it, but that's okay.
I'm with you, Liz.
So the first factor that we have are kindergarten enrollment trends. So these charts were in the report, but I want to just take a few minutes and go through them. So the first factor, the first chart that we're looking at is our kindergarten enrollment as a percentage of the previous year's enrollment.
So it's basically looking at kindergarten each year and saying, how does this year's kindergarten class compare to the number of students we had enrolled last year? So you can see in 2020, and the way they label things, this is the 2020-21 school year. So this was the first year after the start of the COVID pandemic. So you can see as a percentage of the previous year, our enrollment dropped to 93%. We experienced that really across the board. We had a marked decrease, and certainly at kindergarten, parents elected to wait and not send their students if they didn't have to. And that was really a decision made by each family for what worked best for them. What you see the next year is now we have 110%. So many of those families who had held their children now put them in the next year, and so you see that growth. In 2022, we're at 95%. So you can see it's kind of trending back down. It's 95% of a higher base, and we're stabilizing now as people are more comfortable. I thought it might be helpful to put that into numbers. So for example, in 2019, we had 620 students. The next year in 2020, we only had 93% of that number, so we dropped down to about 577. The next year, we made up for those folks who had stayed home, and we were up to 634. And then this year, we're back to normal and stabilizing, and at just a little over 600. So 600 is kind of what we expect to see for the next few years, but that kind of erratic enrollment trend does make it more difficult to project. So we're working through that in the projections. The other chart that you have here is a comparison. It shows our incoming kindergarten class compared to our graduating senior class, and then calculates that as a percentage. You can see it stayed around 85%. And what that's saying, if we use our same numbers that we were looking at earlier, in 2022 we have 603 kindergartners and 710 graduating seniors. So it's about 85%. The kindergarten class is 85% of the senior class. And so it's just an indication of that gradual decline. And we will continue to see that for a few years as the larger classes graduate and these smaller groups come through the system. The next factor that they look at are our changes in the grade level cohorts. Now, a cohort is just a way to express what happens to enrollment as students progress through each grade. So if you have 600 kindergartners and then you have 620 first graders, it's a cohort that's over 100%. The group that you had grew over time. In general, we expect that enrollment is going to be pretty consistent from one grade to the next. That's kind of a typical trend. There are three key times when we see that this is not the case. From kindergarten to first grade, there's typically a more than 100% grade level cohort. Many kindergartners go to Montessori schools or are still in daycare and have not joined the public school system yet. So typically we do see an uptick in first grade. In West Hartford, we also see a little bit of growth at every grade through elementary school. And that's just typically what seems to happen as families are moving in for the school systems. The break where we then see an adjustment is between 5th and 6th grade. As students transition to middle school, many of their families elect to either go to private school or to a religious school, and so we see a drop there that the 6th grade class is typically about 98% of the prior year's 5th grade class. 7th and 8th grade stay pretty consistent, and then the next time when we would expect a change would be the transition from middle school to high school. What's interesting is that we don't really see much of a transition. It seems to be that the number of students who might at that point go to private school are offset by those coming back from a private middle school. So typically we see that it balances out and then slight decreases as we continue on through 12th grade. So these factors are really the basis of our projections as we're going through and as we're looking at long-term projections at each grade level. The third factor that this new methodology looks at is residential development. So we worked with Todd Dumais, the town planner, to learn about new development in town. He assisted us, he filled out a questionnaire for us, and we looked at the impact of 9 proposed projects that are going on around town. We have a group of 16 single-family homes that are being built. And then we have 911 new multifamily units that are in construction and are anticipated to be completed over the next 3 years. And they really are happening all over town. Most of them are, condos or apartments. And all of that new development is going to have an impact on enrollment. So there are certain factors that are used to estimate and to determine how many students are going to come into the system based on new dwelling units. So for example, with single-family homes, it is generally more likely that you're going to have families of a certain size that have students that are school age and will be joining. When you're looking at condos, and particularly apartments that may be studio apartments or one-bedroom apartments, they generally have a lower ratio of children and therefore students. So using those factors, we were able to estimate that in 23-24, the upcoming year, we will potentially receive approximately 119 new students that have moved into town and are living in these new developments, 116 students the next year, and then 46 students the following year. Now, we do a 10-year look, but the reality is that we don't have projects that we know about now that are that far out. So really, this is looking at the impact over the next 3 to 5 year period. One of the things that we try to take into account is, will the projects finish on schedule? We all know that most projects do not finish on schedule. So we look at both a moderate and a conservative approach. So the moderate approach is, if everything comes in when we think it's going to, people move in, students, come into the schools right on schedule. A conservative approach really just trails it off and says, it's going to take a little bit longer perhaps than they're estimating to get these units built, to get people in, and to have the students join our school system. So when we pulled all that information together and look at these factors and come up with our enrollment trends, we come up with this. So what this chart shows you is, for the past 10 years, our actual enrollment. You can see the vertical black line is where we split off, and now we're looking at projected enrollment trends. You'll see at each grade level, elementary, which is red, middle, which is green, and high school, which is blue, there are 2 trend lines. One of them is the moderate approach. One of them is the conservative approach. And interestingly, they're not that far apart. Even though we do have new development coming in, and we're looking at, for example, one year I said 119 students, that's on a base of over 8,800 students. So, when we think that we have over 200 elementary sections alone, that's, half of a student per elementary section. So while the numbers seem big, the impact that it has overall on enrollment is not that great. But as we look, this gives us a really good window to determine where we think enrollment will be. So as we're looking forward, we kind of think that enrollment, the actual trend, will end up between the 2 lines. And so as we're projecting, as we're looking at staffing levels, as we're looking at the resources that we need, that's the information that we're using, or the trend line that we will use for the next 10 years, is the midpoint between the conservative and moderate that you see depicted on this graph. So from a numbers standpoint, what that means, in the current year, we have 3,900 elementary students, almost 2,000 middle students, and 2,900 high school students, for a total of 8,815. So if we look out 5 years and then 10 years, in 5 years' time, I expect we'll have between 8,500 and 8,600. By the time we get to 2032, which is 10 years from now, I think we'll have between 8,200 and 8,300. So, over a 10-year time period, it's, probably a drop of 500 to 600 students. So clearly a gradual decline. And this information is helpful in that it will allow us to plan for appropriate staffing levels, any changes that need to be made, etc. But as I had mentioned in the beginning, as our enrollment was expanding and increasing, we really had facility issues, and that was our big focus. And I think one of the key takeaways from this is that based on a very gradual decline, we really do not have capacity issues for standard classroom or additional facility needs at this time. What has happened over the years, though, is we have seen a much greater need for smaller work areas where students receive one-on-one assistance or small group learning. And so we're not really seeing excess capacity. We're utilizing our school buildings a little bit differently now. But I feel like we're really appropriately sized for where we are today, and I think where we'll be going in the future. So from an overview standpoint, that's kind of where we are as far as trend lines in anticipated enrollment. I'm happy to answer any questions or provide more detail on any area you might be interested in.
Thank you very much, Liz. Yes, Claire.
Yeah, I love data, and it looks like a great program. Is it off or very different from previous projections? And is it the pilot year that we're doing, or was it piloted in other districts first?
I don't know if other districts are using it. To be honest, I've worked directly with our Power School representative, but we didn't talk too much about whether local districts are doing it. In implementing it, we did do kind of a baseline year, but this is really the first year we're using it to do long-term projections. The first projection was really just a point in time. As to whether it's much different from our previous projections, there are some variances, and it's difficult to compare them because one of the things that happened is, when the pandemic hit, it really threw all of our trends off. And so it was difficult to know how to adjust for those trends. Was this setting a new baseline? For example, in 2020, when we only got 575 kindergartners, was this kind of a trend and we're seeing a quicker decline than we thought? And so I think now that we're through those years, I think we have better projections going forward, but it's a little bit difficult to tell. I do feel, though, based on the factors that this considers, that it will be more accurate long-term.
Jason.
Hi, Liz. Thank you so much for the presentation. Sure. The question I have is kind of a two-parter. So I'm thinking about our prior discussion of pre-K, and thinking about the capacity, space constraints that we do have for bringing in more of those classrooms and for the demand that's there. And so as a projection of declining enrollments for K through 12, is there an anticipation of other space opening up potentially for more pre-K within the existing buildings we have? And the second kind of the connector question is, when we did start pre-K, that was also during a time where we see continued decline in total enrollments. So is the enrollment number, is it just K through 12 and it doesn't include the pre-K?
No,
okay.
It doesn't. It was hard to get comparable. Trying to show the trend. The other thing is because to the question of whether we may. As I mentioned, it's probably a 600 student line over a 10-year period. So, that's 12 grades, well, that's 50 students. Concept and keep our pre-K. Really is the key. That's what
If I could just add one thing, because I think that's a good question, and it kind of goes back to, if you look at one of the charts there, I was struck, if you look going forward, we're talking about over a 10-year period, a projection of about 600 student decline. If you go back 10 years, that's about what we've experienced over the past 10 years. And if you remember, at the elementary level, we've pretty much eliminated in elementary school. We've eliminated over 25 different classrooms across that elementary grade level as a response to the declining enrollments over those years, but they don't all happen in the same area. And so that's as Liz was saying, if you have 20 kids in first grade, 20 kids fewer over the course of 3 years, they're not all happening in one school, in one class, and so that's part of the struggle as we're planning. But I think it's important to recognize that, we have reflected that decrease in enrollment, and will continue to reflect that in forthcoming budgets and as well going forward.
And that's a good point, Andy. As I was talking that I don't think we will have excess space or capacity really isn't an issue. As we go forward, if these enrollment trends do come to be, we do, of course, have the opportunity to reduce our staffing. And whether, that will take some time. And of course, we will want to maintain our class size guidelines. But we certainly have been successful in doing that, making sure that we're still, within the acceptable guidelines and providing a reasonable class size for students. So that's something that we look at every year as part of the budget process.
Ethan.
Yeah, I have a question for you on page 4, figure 2. It's just a data question. The first two lines show 93%, 84%, and I assume kindergarten and grades, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what the 97 is. I assumed it was the average of the total school, but it's a higher percentage than the other two lines for 2020.
I'm sorry, which one are you looking at?
So
This
I'm
first
looking at
column here?
total K to 12.
K to 12. So grade 12 to K, what that figure is actually saying.
No, I got that. The third.
Oh, I'm
one.
sorry.
No
Total
problem.
K to 12. So that's comparing that to the prior year. So it's saying that if you look at the data for 2020, our number of students is 97% of what it was the prior year.
Okay.
And we see that drop primarily because of the drop in kindergarten, because that was the pandemic year.
Oh, okay. So it's looking at the total school
Total K to
population.
12. And so it's looking at that, trying to find trends, because, certainly the historical trends inform our projection going forward. I think that those, because of the pandemic, are a little
Skewed.
A little skewed.
So if I'm reading it right, it's saying 97% in 2020 from 2019, 99% from 2021 to 20, et cetera. Okay.
Exactly.
And that's actually consistent, Ethan, with some of the data that we see from the pandemic when we're looking at enrollments. As Liz mentioned, there is that blip of students who didn't enroll that one year, and then we have more the next. We also see interesting things as far as class size, in that we have a cohort now going through Charter Oak that is significantly smaller than other years, and it's simply because due to COVID that first year, Charter Oak is a magnet school, and you're making the choice to send your child away to that, and parents didn't want to do that based on the issues of COVID at that point.
So that was for 22?
That was 20.
So it was in 2020.
Yeah, 2020
And currently
is the
those
group.
students, I think, are in grade 3, maybe?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, interesting.
But you can see it as you're going through that we have a group that is about 25 students fewer than their peers on both sides, and traditionally what a group is at Charter Oak, and it's simply because there were no magnet enrollments, or very few elections for magnet that year.
That's interesting. The other question I was going to, and I'm doing this from memory, remembering looking at the budget book from last year, it seemed like class sizes, as students, or less students, seem to be getting smaller on average, still within your range, but you've gone from, I don't make up the numbers, 24 to whatever the number is, it seems to be dropping.
So that was actually a planned response to the pandemic. We were trying to keep class sizes smaller for health reasons, for safety reasons, but also to encourage learning recovery and learning acceleration. And you may recall with the ESSER funding that we had, we were able to fund additional classroom positions and therefore keep our class sizes
So some of that
smaller
will go away
intentionally.
next year then, unfortunately?
So we have one more year of ESSER funding, and we'll continue to use those funds for that purpose. But over time, we will, have
go
to
back.
tighten. Yep, they'll come back a little bit. We don't expect a material impact, but we will tighten that up over the next 2 years.
All right.
But it's been a nice opportunity for us to utilize that funding and really leverage that
No, that's-
to
I agree.
have smaller class sizes,
All right.
particularly for the younger grades.
Thank you.
Gail?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I just had a question on, you mentioned here that certain schools, you're expecting a bigger decline in, like Aiken, I think was one in Wolcott.
Yes.
Is that data also data that you are gathering from this power school, or is that data based on something else?
It is from Power School. So one of the things that they do is they look at what they call study blocks, and it's approximately our census tracts. And so we have information regarding average age of residents, et cetera. So that's kind of a foundational factor that is built into the projections. So based upon that, and based upon the demographics of each elementary school district area, they are expecting decreases in those areas. What we've seen recently, though, is as our residents, perhaps their children have graduated from school, we see the houses turning over and being replaced with families that have students. And so we see, kind of the population coming back into the schools. So that's definitely something that we'll keep an eye on. It's in the outer years, and so it'll be interesting to see over the next 5 years how that may change based on turnover of homes and also based on increased development if we see more new dwelling units. But we will keep an eye on that.
That's actually one of the interesting things about this program in the module is that you can really sort of see the pattern that neighborhoods are taking and the forecast for that, because neighborhoods have a life cycle to them. I mean, people then, the kids move out, the houses turn over, all of a sudden there's little kids on the street again. And so we saw that in Duffy the past 3 years, and we're now seeing that projected in different neighborhoods over time as well.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments? All right. Well, thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
Now moving on to routine matters, where we will receive approval of the minutes. Seeking a recommendation that the Board of Education approve the minutes from the regular Board of Education meeting on February the 7th, 2023. That is seeking a motion. Is there a motion?
So moved?
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Renee. Discussion. All right. All of those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Now moving on to information and reports. We will now have board members' communications and reports, our superintendent search update. So while we begin with this, I want to welcome Mr. Dave Irwin, and we'll have him pleased to come to the table here. And while he makes his way, just want to summarize how we got to this point, which all of you are aware of, but just a quick recap. Either one is fine. Yes, thank you. And so as we know, from March of last year, we realized that we needed to begin the process of identifying who our new superintendent would be. We're so thankful to Dr. Andy Murrow, who stepped in to be our interim superintendent. But we needed to formalize the process of having a more permanent superintendent. And we as a board, as passionate as we are with what we do, we certainly knew we could not do it alone. So we did put a call out to have a search firm to support us in this effort. And from that process, we're so fortunate to have partnered with CES, Cooperative Educational Services. And we have Mr. David Irwin, who is here representing CES, and many of you will likely are familiar with his face. So nonetheless, in partnering with CES, we had different steps we wanted to take moving forward in the process. The first certainly was putting out a post for those seeking interest in becoming our superintendent. We had a post that went out, and that post closed in December. And also concurrently happening, we wanted to hear from you, hear from the community. This is a collaborative effort. We want to hear from our stakeholders, from our students to teachers, administration, and community members. And we're so fortunate for your participation in that process. So we did close the posting for the superintendent search in December, and we're so thankful that we had 15 wonderful qualified candidates to respond. We're going to pause on that piece at this time, but as we mentioned before, we concurrently wanted to seek input from the community. And we have Mr. Irwin, who is here. Thank you so very much to share and summarize the input of what was received. So I will pass it to you. And when you speak, as you hit the button there, when it's red, that means we can hear you. All right.
Great.
So, Mr. Irwin, thank you so much again for joining us this evening, and we'll pass it to you.
Great. It's great to be here. I appreciate it. I hate my back to the audience, but I know I'm addressing the board. I just wanted to start before I give my report. Great report on the enrollment. One of the best ones I've ever heard. It's so detailed. Having done superintendent work for 25 years, that was a home run. So whatever this new program is, it's very good. We actually had a demographer come in one time where he looked at live births, Dr. Hung Chung. So he actually did some of the stuff the program is doing, but it was a neat way to get a perspective on enrollment, and I think that's going to guide you well. So I'm sorry to stray, but I thought that was worth saying. Well done. So thank you, Lorna, and thank you, Board, for allowing me to come tonight. I'm representing CES. As you've said tonight, we're executive searches, an offshoot of CES. CES is one of the 6 RESCs in the state of Connecticut, and I think we told you when we met with you folks in the summer, late summer, that we hope we're going to be around for years to come, serving the Fairfield County area, but now with our searches statewide. So it's been great, and I work with a colleague, Chip Dumais. Chip was a district superintendent. Now he's the executive director of CES, one of the 6 executive directors of the RESCs. But as Lorna said, we're very grateful for the support of the community. They came out either to a focus group, they took time on a form, and we certainly are grateful to you folks as a school board. You took time to complete a rather lengthy exercise. We know it's time consuming and you put a great deal of thought. We did have 15 very well qualified candidates, and many times you see articles in the paper and you wonder if it's true, but in this case it was 15 great applicants from 7 states. So I think that speaks well to West Hartford. You know you have a great reputation, and I think when you draw people from the Midwest and the West Coast, oftentimes we've done searches and we don't get that type of a draw. We might get Connecticut, we might get a couple from Mass, but you really extended that. The posting did close, as you said, on December 1st, and during the month's latter part of November and December, there was an offering for an electronic survey that was put out. It was put out very clearly on your website. People were directed, if they had questions, they were told where they could get the information on the survey. There were 723 responses to the survey. We put it out in 4 languages, listening to what you had asked. We put it out in English, we put it out in Spanish, Portuguese, and Vietnamese. So that's pretty extensive, so 4 languages. I believe one of the languages we didn't get any responses in, but we did put that out for people. We did have a myriad of data that came from that. There were 11,000 pieces of response. That was hard to put together, but we did put that together into groups. There were 8 virtual focus groups via Zoom, and there was 1 live focus group. And that we had 82 people. And I conducted the focus groups, the live one and the Zoom ones. And obviously, I think I mentioned to the board that everyone was great, but always a highlight when you have students involved giving answers. They're probably the most candid, honest, and politely no holds barred. So as a former educator, current educator, I just love listening to them. And then I mentioned before your structured Board of Education feedback, where you talked about thoughts on measures of success. You gave ideas to us as we prepared to work with a graphic, a mosaic, if you will, measures of success for what you're expecting in your next leader for the first 6 months when he or she arrives, the second 6 months when he or she arrives, and in 18 months. And again, you hope these things are going to happen. The feedback that I mentioned before from the focus groups and from the electronic survey was translated, coded, and categorized, much like you'd be putting together a doctoral study, putting it into themes. And we worked with some comprehensive-based library of leadership skills and attributes. We've partnered with the Bryan Group. Bill Bryan is a psychologist. He's done this for 50 years. He's given us some information. So we take these themes and kind of put them together. We did get input from town officials, from Board of Education, certified staff, non-certified staff, residents, parents, students. So it was pretty extensive. Really, almost anyone had the opportunity to respond to the survey. And in speaking to Mr. Duarte, if anyone wanted a one-on-one with us, we were happy to do that. No one took that opportunity, but we did offer that. If anyone wanted to say, hey, I'm not comfortable in a group, I'd rather do something one-on-one, either on the phone, on Zoom, or a personal meeting, we did offer that. From that, we gathered from people's strengths. You have numerous strengths, and I don't want to get mired in the weeds, but just to name a few: academic opportunities. Megan, I'm assuming you're the student rep, correct? Staff quality, diversity of the staff, and offerings you give to the students throughout the district. Fiscal resources. Obviously, we always hope we have fiscal resources to run a good school system, and the support of the community. On the converse side, some challenges were raised. Nothing that would be insurmountable, but one that came through in the responses and in the focus groups were increased vocational and career-related opportunities for the diversity of the students. Great to have those high-level classes, but saying, hey, if people didn't want to take those, what are some of the courses that they could take? One of the things, and I think in your last presentation you highlighted the numerous elementary schools you have, getting a little bit more coherence among your elementary schools. Wasn't taken as a criticism, but just said, hey, parents might have said, or staff might have said, we could beef this up a little bit. Like everyone has dealt with pre-pandemic, exacerbated in pandemic, the mental health needs of students and really of staff. I think you can't pick up a paper where you don't read it, where it's not scary to listen to it. Not unique to your district, but something that the new person would want to consider. And maintaining a student-centered focus would be in light of pressures that people have, and I think that's a realistic thing. Experiences, obviously experience as an educator, some experience with curriculum and instruction, certainly a knowledge of special education. Obviously, we know special ed has changed over the years with the whole inclusion model. Had the good fortune of doing a workshop years ago on inclusive practices. That was a big deal 20 years ago. Now it's expected, and we want to cultivate that even more. Success in budget development, communication, and implementation of a successful budget that's going to meet the needs of the students and the system. And this is a key one, record of success in a similar district. Proven success, because it's easy for people to say, oh, it was very successful. But I think you have to look at a demographic, you have to look at what kind of work has been done, and what has been the true proven track record of the person. The final piece that the board is able to work with, from this, we looked at development of roles, and that would be the major tasks necessary for the success of the superintendent. Breaking those into the areas that came out of the themes from the survey, based on leadership skills, attributes, and qualities, based on the synthesis of all the stakeholder responses. And finally, underneath that, with those roles, we developed a set of competencies based on that, set of skills, talents, and attributes that support the high level of role execution. And that was the platter from which you will conduct your search. And there's more detail. I wanted to keep this a little high level, Lorna. I don't want to get into the weeds. I believe there is a report that you may be releasing about information, but that's in a nutshell, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you so very, very much. Thank you very much. Yes, and as you made reference to this evening, a report that summarizes the stakeholder feedback, just as what you had shared, will be available on our website, on the Superintendent Search website. So that will be something that will be available there. Teammates, questions that you may have for Mr. Irwin? Again, we appreciate already the open lines of communication we have maintained, so questions asked will be for the purpose of helping to inform others who may be viewing. Jason.
Hello, Dave.
Hi, Jason.
Yes, I just wanted to publicly thank you and CES for the excellent services we've received and the compilation of over 1,000 comments into such a I don't know what adjective I want to use, but a mirror for the community to see the kinds of hopes, aspirations they have for this position, and that it does generate a kind of collective sort of hope for the district. So, I really want to thank you. I certainly could not have done that. and so I think it's such an extremely useful tool in the search process. And it's, I think, something that will be highly valued by the community. Thank you.
Thank you. We've worked with several groups. If I can just add the level of commitment that you put in as a school board so far, the thoughtful, detailed questions that you've asked of Chip and of me have been really high level in your deliberations as you think through issues. No stone has been left unturned. It's been done in a very gracious way, and I think it befits all of you to feel good about yourselves and wanting to get the best leader, because you've certainly put the time commitment in. I know you're not concluded yet, but I think whatever decision comes forth, it's based on data, it's based on listening to the mirror, as you said, Jason, and your diligent hard work.
Thank you. And with you helping to shepherd us through these pastures certainly has made it all the more possible, so thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? All right. Well, thank you so very much, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much, and I'd like to also thank Julio for all his help throughout this process, too. He's been on the phone always asking if we need anything, and that helps us as well.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you, Julio. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Moving on to other information and discussions. Are there any other updates from boards that would like to be shared? All right. Moving on now to future business. Announcement of future meeting dates. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, March the 7th, 2023, where we will have our regular Board of Education meeting to receive presentation of the superintendent's budget here at Town Hall at 7 o'clock. Followed by Wednesday, March the 15th, where we'll have budget workshop number 1 at 7 o'clock here at the Town Hall in room 314. Then on Tuesday, March the 21st, we'll have our regular Board of Education meeting at 7 o'clock here at the Town Hall in room 314. And then March the 29th, on Wednesday, we'll have our Board of Education public hearing at 7 o'clock, followed by the budget workshop number 2 here at the Town Hall. Any request for any future agenda items? Gail.
Thanks, Lorna. I'd like to ask that we have on a upcoming agenda an item where we can discuss the formation of a subcommittee of the board that deals with curriculum. Initially, as I had told you, I was going to make that as a motion, but after just in discussion, we decided that maybe it would be better if we just had it as an agenda item in an upcoming meeting. Thanks.
Thank you. Other requests for agenda items? Right. Comments from visitors. Are there any visitors here that would like to make a comment? Seeing none, we do not have an executive session. Therefore, we'll seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Meeting adjourned at 8:35.